Hi, fifth graders. Ms. Brucker here. This week we are going to start the next part of our three-dimensional solids unit. This week we'll be working on volume. Last week we spent a lot of time practicing with three-dimensional solids, identifying them by the shape of their base or their other faces. We spent time counting vertices, edges, and faces, and all of that, those are all things that we're going to use this week as we move forward. So let's get started for today. Our learning target is we will understand that volume can be calculated by counting the number of unit cubes in a solid figure or in a three-dimensional figure. That might seem a little bit confusing to you because we have not talked about a couple of those vocabulary terms in there. So that's what we're going to start with today. The first thing that we're going to talk about is what is volume? You might be thinking about volume as how loud music is, or if you're in your parents' car and the speakers are turned up. In math, that is not the type of volume that we are going to talk about. Instead, we are going to define volume as the amount of space an object takes up. Okay, now at first this is a little bit confusing, but today all we're going to practice is finding the volume of figures by counting the number of unit cubes. So the next thing that we're going to talk about real quick is unit cubes. This right here is 1 unit cube, or we can also call this 1 cubic unit. And this is going to be new for us to report things in cubic units. You guys have been working on area a lot. In an area, because we are only multiplying 2 dimensions, like a base times a height, then our units are always in square inches, SQ, or we can use that exponent 2 to mean square. When we are talking about volume, what we're going to do to find volume is we are actually going to be multiplying 3 dimensions, or a length, a width, and a height. So we are going to be multiplying 3 dimensions to find volume. So that is why we've been talking about these figures as 3-dimensional solids. They have 3 dimensions, so we can also use that exponent 3 when we're reporting volume. Okay, so now, knowing that one of these, 1 cube, is equal to 1 cubic unit, the only thing that we're going to work on today is counting the number of cubic units in solids, such as this solid over here, to find the volume. So underneath here, I'm just going to write volume. Oh, my marker's a little bit off today. I'll work on that. And then we're going to count how many cubic units are in this solid, which I'm going to mark on top of this with my marker so that you can see them. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means that the volume of this figure is 4 cubic units. The amount of space that this solid takes up is 4 cubic units. So we can also think about volume as the number of cubic units that are in a figure, because that is the same as the amount of space that the object or the solid takes up. Okay, again, we're going to be working to find the volume of this solid, so how many cubic units make it up. And today we are doing that by counting the number of unit cubes in a solid. So unit cubes is one of those cubes in a solid. Okay, let's work on this. So I see 1, 2, 3, and I can only see the top face of that cube, 4, 5, and 6. And I see these 2 are stacked on top of each other right here. So that's how I know to count 1 and 2 there. So the volume of this figure is 6 cubic units. And I think what you're going to notice today in a lot of our figures, we don't have measurements for how long or how wide or how tall any of our figures are. So we're just going to talk about how many cubes, unit cubes, make them up. So the amount of space that this solid is taking up, or this figure is taking up, is 6 cubic units. Okay, here's a little bit more practice. So we're going to do that same thing again. We are going to be finding the volume, or how much space that this figure takes up, by counting the number of unit cubes. Okay, I'm going to use my marker to do this. It does not matter where you start. You just should find some way to keep track. Just counting them visually without being able to mark on them might be a little bit difficult. So in your practice on your Google document, you might want to use one of the drawing tools, or even your mouse cursor or highlighter to do the same thing. I am going to start by counting this bottom layer of our figure. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unit cubes. And then I see on the top here, I have a smaller layer that has 1, 2 for a total of 7 cubic units. Now I'm going to write this a little bit different. Let's write it a couple different ways that we can report volume, especially when we don't have any measurement dimensions like inches or centimeters or feet or yards. Remember, we're just finding the number of unit cubes in this solid. So we're going to say cubic units. So I see that this is made up of 7 unit cubes. Remember, this is 1 unit cube. So when I went through and counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that is what I was counting. So the volume of this is 7 cubic units. You could also abbreviate cubic by writing CU, kind of like SQ for square. So I'm going to do that too. 7 CU units. Or we could also write this way, 7 units cubed. And remember, this exponent here means that we're going to be multiplying 1, 2, 3 times. And that might not make sense quite yet, but when we get to finding volumes of solids, that will make a little bit more sense. So it is up to you what you would like to choose to report volume. You can use any of these 3. I would recommend when we're starting this unit out that you're probably sticking with this or this way to report volume. So the amount of space that this figure takes up is 7 cubic units. It has a volume of 7 cubic units. Okay, continuing practice on this learning target. I put up on your screen right now, you will see a little bit more complex figure, and we're going to talk about why we're going to practice that as we go through this problem. So again, we're going to find the volume, which means how much space that this figure takes up. Or today we can think about volume as how many unit cubes are in the figure. Okay, remember that one of the cubes that you can see is a unit cube. So what we're going to do is start by counting these, and then we're going to just quick stop and pause, and I'm going to ask you a question in the middle. Okay, okay, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I see 9 unit cubes, and you can see on some of these cubes, I can see 2 faces, but on some of them, I counted those 9 just by looking at the top face, because that tells me that the cube is still there, even if I can't see all 6 of the faces or even 2 of the faces. Okay, now, my question to you is, do you notice these red cubes right here? If I see that there are 2 red cubes here, and I see that there's another layer of cubes on top of them, what kind of assumption could I make about what unit cubes might be hidden underneath, or how many unit cubes might be hidden underneath that layer of blue cubes? I think that because we have layers, or I guess rows of 3, and I see that I'm going to have 2 more rows of 3 underneath here, I can add 9 plus 6, because 6 will give me those 2 rows times 3 unit cubes. So this will just give me how many red unit cubes we have. So we have 15 red unit cubes. And then I need to go and count the number of unit cubes that are on the top, the blue ones. So I'm going to write red here, or we could call that our bottom layer. And then we do the same kind of thing up here. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So our total volume is going to be adding these two numbers. And I see right here that I'm going to need to regroup, or you don't need to show a lot of work for this. This should be very easy mental math for most of you. And I see that my volume is 21 units cubed, or cubic units. This figure is made up of, or composed of, 21 cubic units. Okay, here's our last figure that we're going to practice our learning target on today. Again, we're going to be finding the volume, or how much space this figure takes up, by counting the number of unit cubes that makes it up. So I'm going to do that again by marking these. We're going to try something a little bit different quick. We're going to start by counting this kind of top layer right here. So I'm going to start by marking on those cubes, and I can see this cube and this cube on the top layer. I can see both the front face and the top face. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So even though I can't see the other faces of those, I can see that there are 2 cubes behind those front 2 cubes. So our top layer has 4 cubic units, is made up of 4 cubic units. Now I'm going to count these others that I can see very well first, okay? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then because I know that I have 4 on this top layer, I can assume that I also have 4 underneath here in this bottom layer, that those top layers are able to stack on. So I have 4 plus 7 on the bottom layer equals 11, plus 4 on the top layer equals 15. So this solid is made from 15 unit cubes. That means the volume of this solid, or how much space it takes up, is 15 cubic units.